We're back with the CNN Climate Crisis Town Hall in minutes. Senator Kamala Harris and Amy Klobuchar. Let's continue now with businessman Andrew Yang. Now, Mr. Yang, I want to go to Sarah Smith, a graduate student at Columbia University studying climate and society. Her question is about geoengineering technologies that would aim to reverse global warming. Sarah?
Your platform relies heavily on geoengineering and locally based efforts rather than aggressive federal emissions policies. Geoengineering poses major risks, and according to last year's IPCC report, even aggressive development of carbon removal technology is unlikely to keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, absent substantial rapid reductions in emissions. Can you quantify the reduction in CO2 attainable from the geoengineering strategies you propose?
I just want to clarify a point that she's making for some of our viewers. Sarah's question mentioned 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature increase that the international community, as you well know, considers catastrophic.
Yeah. Congrats, Columbia's a great school. I went there myself. That doesn't make it good. So first, geoengineering is not the primary approach at all. We have to reduce emissions first and foremost. And if you look at my plan, of the 5 trillion, like a fraction of one of the trillions is looking at geoengineering. We have to get the best of emissions. It's the primary driver of climate change. Geoengineering, I just want us to think very, very big picture of what's happening. You have countries, island countries on the other side of the world that are literally sinking underwater. And we're lifting people, the UN is helping people move. Now, they don't have the capacity to do something dramatic to alter the environment. But imagine a country like China 25 years from now, who's going to be bearing the brunt of climate change in the same way that we are. They're not very consultative. And so you can imagine them doing something that affects us and the rest of the world, spraying sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. So we need to face facts about the scope of the challenge and lead globally. So I would convene a geoengineering summit and get countries from around the world to make sure that we don't have rogue actors just going off on their own. So this is my approach. It is not the primary approach, but it's something that we need to explore in the days ahead, because the reality is the last 4 years have already been the 4 warmest years in recorded history. July is the warmest month in recorded history. The Earth is likely getting warmer around us, and even as we're attacking emissions, we need to start researching innovative methods to address climate change.
I want to follow up on that specific point, Mr. Yang, because you want to invest in these new technologies.
I do.
Like space mirrors and, as you point out, cloud seeding, which is actually spraying sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Why divert federal money, which is obviously scarce, to these unproven and potentially risky ideas when there are known solutions out there that we all know, solar power, wind, stuff like that, that we know already works?
We're here, Wolf, together because we know this is a crisis. And in a crisis, all solutions have to be on the table. And so if you are attacking on one side, you also should be researching various alternatives on the other, and that to me is just responsible management and responsible leadership.
Are all Americans going to have to drive electric cars?
Well, electric cars, it's not something you have to do. It's awesome. And so over time, yeah, we're going to make it so that electric cars are the thing to do. You feel like you're driving the future. And I did not just say that because Elon Musk endorsed me just the other week.
So what's the answer? Are we all going to have to drive electric cars?
We are all going to love driving our electric cars.
Will we have to drive electric cars?
Well, there'll still be some legacy gas guzzlers on the road for quite some time, because this is not a country where you're going to take someone's clunker away from them, but you are going to offer to buy the clunker back and help them upgrade.
All right, we got a question from Rebecca Eastwood. She's the advocacy coordinator for a faith-based nonprofit in Washington, D.C. Rebecca.
Thank you. I am originally from Iowa, and many in my family are farmers. Iowa's economy is deeply tied to industrial agriculture, yet the recent UN report on land says land use globally, including agriculture, is responsible for 23% of human greenhouse gas emissions, and that emissions from agriculture are increasing. What is your plan to protect farming communities in the Midwest while at the same time addressing how our food systems contribute to climate change?
I've been spending a lot of time in Iowa. I love the state a great deal. It's another thing about running for president. We need to help farmers modernize their land use in terms of the environmental impact. And once again, this is an issue around economic incentives being one direction, and then what's good for the climate and what's good for society in the other. So we have to try and bring those together by providing economic incentives and resources to help farmers modernize and rotate plant crops and try and actually measure the impact they're having on the environment. Now, the big issue in the farming community is that right now, what's happening, all the mom and pop farms are getting gobbled up by these conglomerates. And you go, and instead of some beautiful vision of a family farm that you have in your head, it's some mega farm conglomerate with automated tractors as far as the eye can see. So the goal, in my mind, should be trying to create incentives so that if you are farming in a responsible and sustainable way, that we can actually make family businesses possible by supporting a food ecosystem that includes more farm-to-table dining. And to me, I'm an American that I believe most Americans would be happy to pay for a locally sourced farm-to-table supply chain as opposed to the mega farm monolith that unfortunately right now produces most of our food.
Well, let me follow up on that as well, Mr. Yang. Meat consumption, beef in particular, is a major driver of climate change. Should Americans change their eating habits and eat less beef?
You know, the UN just released a study that said we're going to be okay if the vast majority of the world goes vegetarian immediately. You guys see that? So it's good for the environment, it's good for your health if you eat less meat. Certainly meat is an extraordinarily expensive thing to produce from an environmental sustainability point of view. So I think it would be healthy on both an individual and a societal level for us to move in that direction. But again, this is a country where there's a lot of individual autonomy, and so you can't force people's eating choices on them. All you can do is try and shape our system so that over time we evolve in a productive way.
What aspects of the Green New Deal do you support and which do you reject?
I love the vision of the Green New Deal. The framers of it have done us all a great service by energizing so many people around a vision. And to me, the only issue I have with the Green New Deal is the timing and the timeline. I mean, they are right that we need to take urgent action, but the timeline that they put out there would do away with commercial air travel and a lot of other things in a particular time frame, that if we have a little bit more time, we can head in the same direction and achieve most of the same value.
President Trump today announced plans to roll back light bulbs that are more
what is up with that?
efficient.
I think he's just messing with CNN on that one.
Should the U.S. government have a say on what kind of light bulbs we use?
Well, certainly, if we do have a say in what light bulbs we use, we need light bulbs that don't burn out. Because you know these light bulbs are in manufacturers, they intentionally burn out. So there's an industry and we replace them over and over again. Do you think that's good for the earth? Of course not. So if anything, we should be pushing regulations that make it so that our light bulbs consume less energy and need to be replaced less often.
All right, let's go to Wendy Fleischer.
I'm
who's
talking
with
about
us.
light bulbs.
You know, that's what happens. Wendy is from Brooklyn. She's a consultant for environmental and social justice initiatives. Wendy.
Thank you. You mentioned China a few times. Some climate action naysayers say that China should act first. So tell us why the United States should lead in moving the country and making a transition, a just transition to a clean, healthy, clean energy economy. And who would benefit from the changes you propose? And how does your plan ensure that hardworking Americans are benefited and not hurt?
Well, to me, the U.S. is vital to building an international consensus on climate change. And so we need to act first because by forming the table and saying who's with us on this, then we can galvanize dozens of our allies and partners in the Western world. And I believe that China would be a partner because they're seeing the worst effects of climate change on an epic, almost unimaginable scale. And if you take a look at some of the smog in some of their major cities, like people literally just wear masks just for their own health and safety. So the U.S. has always been a global leader. We are still the focal point of the world's economy. And if we lead on this, then we can move people in the right direction very quickly. As for American workers, I was just with Ned Reynolds, who's an entrepreneur in New Hampshire. If you imagine what we have to do, we have to install solar panels on hundreds of thousands of homes and buildings around the country. Think about the jobs that's going to create. Ned Reynolds started his own business. Now he's up to 260 employees, primarily solar panel installers in New Hampshire. So you talk about what's good for American workers. I think Ned's business is the business that we should be emulating around the country.
I want to follow up on that, because how can you ensure that America's efforts to cut emissions won't be in vain if carbon pollution, let's say in China or India, continues to expand over the next decades?
Yeah, that's why we need a global effort, Wolf. That's one reason why, to me, the Paris Accords, the only issue I have with them is that they didn't go far enough, because a lot of the enforcement mechanisms really aren't there. There are a lot of countries that sign them and just essentially it's like, well, you know, I signed it, I feel good, but then their corporate actors are not necessarily integrating them into their operations. So one principle that we're going to have in our businesses here is that if you are a very large business, you need to measure your carbon imprint and your effect on the environment. And then if we extend that to operations in other countries that are either of US companies or over time our trading partners, then we can have more sophisticated standards that include environmental impact, not just for American companies, but the companies and countries we do business with.
As all of us who have followed your campaign know, you're an advocate for what's called universal basic income. Do you think that policy of cutting everyone a check would be enough to help, for example, coal workers, others in the fossil fuel industry who would be put out of work in a transition to a green economy?
Well, $1,000 a month is a game changer for tens of millions of American families. And while it's not going to replace someone's job, if you have a household with 2 adults, $24,000 a year is enough for you to make affirmative plans about your future, possibly go back to school, move, start a new business, take care of yourselves, make your family more resilient. And a lot of it, Wolf, is that people put this $1,000 a month. The question in my mind is, what's the alternative? Like, we know many of these jobs are going to be automated away or fade away in a transition to a renewable economy. So the question is, what do we have for American workers so they feel protected and part of the process?
Tina Savitis is a student at Fordham University here in New York, originally from Norwalk, Connecticut. Her question is about PFAS, toxic chemicals that have been found in U.S. drinking water sources.
Good evening. There's a lot of new studies coming out on the destructiveness of PFAS and how it harms human health. They're prevalent throughout the environment. So what is your plan for regulating the materials that go into the products that are used by everyday Americans?
We need to do much more. I'm the parent of 2 young boys, one of whom is autistic. And as a parent, when you have your kids drinking water or using various toys and household items, there's always something in the back of your mind, which is this safe? And I just came from Flint, and while this is a separate issue, it's kind of the same in the sense that the folks in Flint discovered that their water was toxic after the fact and are still recovering. So to me, safe drinking water is a fundamental human right, and that if you're an American, you should not be stressed out about the water that you are drinking and your kids are drinking. And this is, again, the problem with having the almighty dollar running our society, where people look up and say, oh, replacing the pipes is expensive, or, oh, another substance would be more expensive. Are you kidding me? You know what's expensive? Poisoning our kids.
Yes.
As you know, Mr. Yang, 20% of U.S. electricity is generated from nuclear power plants. What would you do with those plants? Would you decommission them?
To me, nuclear energy needs to be on the table in a transition to a more renewable economy. Because our society consumes a great deal of energy, and nuclear right now, it gets a bad rap in part because the technologies we're using are antiquated. And so if you look up, we are working on these new generation nuclear reactors that use thorium instead of uranium, and thorium is not natively fissile or radioactive. So the odds of a catastrophe drop precipitously. It's much, much safer to dispose of. It produces much more energy. So we need to upgrade to thorium-fueled reactors. And to me, though, trying to get rid of all the nuclear power plants that produce 20% of the nation's energy is not going to help us accomplish our goals.
Would you ban all offshore oil drilling?
Yes, I would.
Okay. We got another question here. There she is right there. Laura Cottingham is a lawyer who specializes in environmental litigation and private practice. She also works with Columbia University Sabin Center for Climate Change Law.
Tackling the climate crisis will require contributions from all sectors, including the private sector. In your view, what is the role of corporate leadership and responsibility in this area? How will you work with businesses to create the necessary incentives and initiatives to drive meaningful progress on climate change?
I'm happy to say that American business is waking up. And the Business Roundtable led by Jamie Dimon recently announced that they need to have a broader view of their own economic impact than shareholder value. They need to expand it to stakeholder value, which includes their impact on the environment. So working with businesses, first, a carbon fee is going to go a long way because all of a sudden they have to pay when they pollute. So that's going to be immediate. And they'll look up and they'll do the right thing by their own businesses. But the second thing is if we make economic impact part of our economic measurements, and then each company has to report on them, then you'll see their behavior change very, very dramatically because in this country, you aim towards what you measure. One of the big problems in America is we are measuring the wrong things. Under my presidency, we will start measuring the right things, and businesses will be my willing partner in this.
Let's go to a video question submitted by Patrick Stolenwerk from Chicago. He's a PhD candidate in physics at Northwestern University. Patrick.
According to the Cost of War Project by Brown University, 1.2 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases have been released by the military since the start of the 2001, quote, global war on terror. What will you do about the role of the military-industrial complex in contributing to climate change?
It's a great question. My father actually got a PhD in physics. I'm talking to him like he's here. He's not here. Just disappeared from the screen. We're spending $750 billion that we know of on our military-industrial complex every year. And I'm going to share a story that I heard secondhand, so I can't verify it. But there was a Top Gun, a fighter pilot, who said that his least favorite time of the year is at the end of the fiscal year because he flies over the Pacific Ocean and dumps oil into the ocean. Now, why is he doing that? Because they have to use all the oil that's budgeted or else they won't get the same amount budgeted the following year. So this broke his heart, broke my heart to even hear this story. What we have to do is we have to take some of the $750 billion and start channeling it towards our infrastructure, which will be an evergreen need. We know we need to make it more sustainable over time. But again, in America, we follow the almighty dollar, and right now there are hundreds of billions being spent on our military that is generating a ton of emissions and pollution. And so if we take a significant portion of that budget and channel it towards infrastructure, we can make a good out of right now a huge net negative.
What's the biggest personal sacrifice you want the American people to make in order to deal with this crisis?
You know, well, I was thinking a lot about this. Like right now, we feel all this pressure to have our micro impacts be low. So you carry a bottle instead of getting bottled water. You get those really irritating straws, sometimes not of your own choice. You know, you recycle, you compost, but then you have this sinking feeling in the back of your mind that your actions are not actually going to move the needle in the context of a $20 trillion economy. And so what I would ask of the American people is to think bigger about the changes we can make collectively, and that stop thinking that if you take some personal action, it's going to solve things, because the reality is we need to bring the entire world together.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. We're taking favor selfies. Thank you all.
And to our viewers, up next, Senator Kamala Harris, followed by two more top candidates hoping to distinguish themselves tonight, Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Elizabeth Warren.